Try typing the word superpower into your search bar. Within seconds, the algorithm will deliver one absolute answer: the United States. This isn't just dominance, it's hegemony. Think about it. Nearly 25% of all the money circulating on this planet flows through this single nation. The dollar is no longer just a currency, it is the central nervous system of the global economy. And its military? It's not just an army, it is the gold standard for how destructive power is defined in the modern age. To many, America looks like a giant that has existed since the dawn of time. But herein lies the irony. America is a newcomer. While other civilizations measure their history in millennia, America hasn't even reached its 3rd century. How did a nation this green leapfrog ancient empires to sit at the top of the global food chain? What is the secret behind this historical anomaly? Today, we go under the skin of the giant. We will strip back the layers of its power, one by one, to understand how a young nation came to dictate the world. Picture the year 1507. Inside a small workshop in Germany, a cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller was attempting to map a world that had just exploded in size. On that very parchment, a single word appeared for the first time. A name that would not only define a territory, but change the course of human history forever. America. Waldseemüller wasn't just making it up. The name was a tribute to Amerigo Vespucci. While other explorers stubbornly insisted they had reached the edges of Asia, Vespucci was the first to declare a radical truth, that the land to the west was not the end of the old world, but a new world. But here lies history's great irony. Long before Waldseemüller's ink was dry, and long before Europeans discovered its meaning, the American landmass had been home to civilizations breathing for thousands of years. The map gave it a name, but the land already had a story. Tens of thousands of years before colonialism was even a concept, this land was already pulsing with life. The migration from Asia, beginning as far back as 40,000 years ago, was more than just a movement of people. It was the birth of architectural civilization. These were not just survivors. They were agricultural engineers, urban designers, and builders of complex state-level societies. One of them was the Mississippian culture, a pre-Columbian world so advanced, yet ironically, often erased from mainstream history. But this glory was not shattered by war. It was destroyed by something invisible. When European ships first touched these shores, they brought hidden passengers, deadly plagues, smallpox and other viruses swept across the continent like an unstoppable storm. Millions of lives vanished before they could even grasp who these visitors truly were. By 1513, Spain planted its flag in La Florida, eventually stretching its reach to California and New Mexico. But the true new chapter began when the British turned their gaze toward the eastern seaboard. There, they established the permanent settlements we now know as the 13 colonies. This was ground zero, a foundation built upon the remnants of ancient civilizations, which would eventually grow into the singular power we call the United States. (1607) marked a chapter that could never be undone. Off the coast of Virginia, English ships began to drop anchor, carrying an ambition that would change the face of this continent forever. They didn't come just to visit, they came to stay. Forests were cleared, permanent settlements were built, and acre by acre, land that had been inhabited for millennia was slowly claimed under the flag of a distant king. But the eastern seaboard was a stage for global rivalry. The Dutch planted their influence through New Netherland, a strategic trading post that we now know as the most iconic city in the world, New York. Yet British ambition was on another level. They weren't just trading, they were occupying. From the cold of Massachusetts to the warmth of Georgia, new colonies emerged like a line of fortresses along the Atlantic. These, the 13 colonies, were not just settlements. They were an expansion machine, ready to move west, crushing old boundaries for the sake of a new empire. But behind the rise of these new cities, a dark pattern began to take shape. A ruthless cycle, the systematic seizure of indigenous lands, and the dark chapter of slavery. Millions of human beings were forced out of Africa, chained and carried across the ocean, to serve as the fuel for the British colonial economic engine. Yet, history has a way of turning. Ironically, these colonists, those who built prosperity on the suffering of others, began to feel the weight of their own chains. They came as seekers of a new destiny, but found themselves treated as mere cash cows for the crown across the Atlantic. Britain demanded suffocating taxes without giving them a voice. An injustice summarized in one iconic phrase: no taxation without representation. The spark of liberty ignited. Radical ideas from thinkers like John Locke and Thomas Paine spread like wildfire, challenging the absolute authority of the monarchy. It reached its peak on July 4, 1776. A document was born from the hand of Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence. America proclaimed itself a free nation through a long, brutal, and exhausting war. But this birth left a stain that could not be erased. In the records of history, America's dark trail was visible from its very first heartbeat, a nation born with the promise of freedom for all, yet allowing slavery and forced displacement to continue under the shadow of its own flag. As a new nation, America inherited the old goals of its colonial past to expand its sovereignty and its power. From this ambition, a conviction was born. It was known as manifest destiny, the idea that God had blessed America and intended for this nation to rule the entire continent, while continuously increasing its strength. This ideology took a firm hold on the United States throughout the 19th century. It was not just an idea, but a concrete campaign to expand territory by forcing Native American tribes off their own ancestral lands. In the name of divine destiny, displacement, forced relocation, and violence were justified as the price of progress. This campaign also served as America's pretext to seize natural resources in territories that had been held by indigenous people for centuries. But the expansion did not stop there. The reach of American sovereignty also targeted the lands of other nations. One of these was Mexico, which had actually gained its independence from Spain in the early 19th century, with a vast territorial reach. Over time, American settlements grew rapidly in northern Mexico. In fact, the number of English speakers eventually outnumbered the Spanish-speaking residents in that region. Tensions became inevitable. In 1835, American settlers in northern Mexico staged a rebellion, much like what happened in Texas. This uprising led to the independence of Texas from Mexico. However, 10 years later, Texas, which had briefly stood as an independent republic, voluntarily chose to join the United States. Not long after, while America was led by its 11th president, James K. Polk, the American government demanded clarity on the borders with Mexico. Tensions reached a breaking point. The territory of California was claimed unilaterally, and open war between the United States and Mexico erupted in the mid-19th century. The war ended in a total victory for America. Their forces even successfully invaded Mexico City. As a result, Mexico lost nearly one-third of its national territory. From this very point, the sovereign territory of the United States finally stretched in full from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. This move became a decisive factor for the future of America. The Pacific coastal territories they now controlled were not merely an expansion on a map. They were a long-term economic foundation. This route connected directly to the flow of international trade toward the nations of the Pacific and East Asia, regions with an economic dynamism that continues to grow. Even though, in the beginning, the United States chose to isolate itself from global affairs, its geographic position, facing both the Atlantic and the Pacific, provided a strategic advantage that remains hard to match. The construction of the railway network unified the East and the West. It made the nation logistically mature and ready to take the next step when the Industrial Revolution swept the world in the 19th century. America slowly shifted its course from a nation dependent on agriculture into a new powerhouse in industrial production and global trade. This transformation did not only change the economy, it changed the very character of the nation. America even reached the point where it could produce its own firearms. These products quickly became widely recognized and were capable of competing with the long-established arms industries of Europe, including Germany. This leap in industrial technology made this young nation increasingly independent. It moved fast, leaving many of its competitors behind. The independence and efficiency in the production sector gave birth to a new generation of American entrepreneurs. These men were no longer satisfied, operating only within their own borders. They began to spread their wings, investing capital, and carrying American economic influence to every corner of the globe. As the economy surged and interactions with the outside world intensified, the United States began to face new challenges. Challenges that were far greater than mere domestic affairs. By 4, in the year 1898, an explosion sank the battleship USS Maine in Havana Harbor, Cuba. Even though the exact cause is still debated to this day, this event was used as the catalyst to trigger a war between the United States and Spain. That brief conflict, known as the Spanish-American War, drastically changed America's position on the world stage. From this conflict, America seized territories formerly under Spanish rule, including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Around the same period, America also engaged in a series of military and economic interventions across the Caribbean and Central America, events that would later be known as the Banana Wars. This was not merely a trade conflict. It was a calculated effort to protect corporate interests and secure America's geopolitical influence in the region. The expansion continued. Territories such as Hawaii, Samoa, and several other regions in the Pacific gradually fell into the sphere of American power. In a very short time, the United States was transformed. It shifted from a regional player into a force that could no longer be ignored. Its name began to appear frequently in international political circles. When World War I broke out, America became even more entangled in global dynamics. Other nations began to see it, not just as an economic powerhouse, but as a vital strategic ally. The policy of isolationism, which had been guarded for so long, slowly began to open. At that time, the seat of American leadership was held by Woodrow Wilson, a president who believed that world peace could be maintained through international cooperation. He pushed for the creation of the League of Nations, hoping to prevent the next Great War. That effort failed. World War II broke out nonetheless, devastating the economies of Europe. But from that very destruction, an unexpected opportunity emerged. Without anyone predicting it, the war that shattered the old world became the moment for the United States to level up, rising to a new status as a global superpower. In a world that had lost its traditional great powers, the United States found itself in a position that, historically speaking, was quite fortunate. Its geographic location was a massive advantage. Separated from the heart of the conflict in Europe, America remained relatively safe from the direct devastation of the Great War. While other nations lay in ruins, America was able to focus its attention on internal development, its economy, its infrastructure, and the strengthening of its military. These advantages were further solidified by an abundance of natural wealth. Fertile land, vast forests, and massive mineral reserves became a rock-solid foundation for economic growth and government stability. At this point, America took a pragmatic approach in its foreign relations. It built relatively friendly ties with former Spanish colonies, not out of solidarity, but out of economic self-interest. This strategy led to a significant surge in America's national income, a moment rarely seen in the history of the modern world. But America's power did not rest on economics and resources alone. Its influence also grew from its role as the architect of the global political and economic system. One defining trait of the United States that has been consistently recorded throughout history is its tendency to intervene beyond its borders. These interventions have often had a direct impact on global stability. One example is America's involvement in the Barbary Wars, a series of conflicts that took place between 1801 and 1815 in the region of North Africa. In this war, America allied itself with Sweden and the Kingdom of Sicily against North African powers that were under the influence of the Ottoman Empire. The objective was clear: to protect American merchant ships crossing through strategic trade routes. This same motive was seen once again in America's foreign policy in Asia. During the presidency of Millard Fillmore, the American government ordered Matthew C. Perry to carry out a diplomatic mission that would later be known as the Perry Expedition. By deploying powerful warships, America pressured Japan to end its policy of isolation, which had lasted for more than 2 centuries. Japanese ports were forced open for trade and for commercial treaties with the United States. Since the 17th century, Japan had remained closed to the world to protect its sovereignty from foreign colonialism. But the American pressure during this expedition was simply too great to ignore. The opening of Japan provided a strategic advantage for America, paving the way for its influence across the Asia and Pacific regions. Prior to this, America had also been involved in aiding Spanish colonies that were demanding their independence. Its victory over Spain did not only mark the end of an old European power, it also solidified America's position as the world's newest global force. Through its diplomatic and military missions, the true greatness of the United States was only fully recognized by the world when the nation became directly involved in World War I and World War II, and more importantly, when it was able to thrive amidst the global economic devastation that followed. World War I shattered the economies of the great powers and brought down ancient empires such as the Ottoman Empire and China under the Qing dynasty. Yet, America remained relatively safe. Its geographic location, often described as being in a different hemisphere, meant that the direct impact of the war hardly touched its soil. The same pattern emerged when World War II broke out. Instead of being destroyed, America actually found itself at an advantage. Many nations lost their infrastructure. Europe's economy collapsed, while America remained intact and even managed to strengthen its industry.
Europe is still emerging from the devastation and dislocation of the most destructive war in history. Within its own resources, Europe cannot achieve, within a reasonable time, economic stability. The solution would be much easier, of course, if all the nations of Europe were cooperating, but they are not. Far from cooperating, the Soviet Union and the Communist parties have proclaimed their determined opposition to a plan for European economic recovery.
After the war ended, America, through the initiative of George Marshall, launched the Marshall Plan, a massive economic aid program for the nations of Western and Southern Europe. Openly, the program aimed to rebuild the European economy and create post-war stability. But behind that curtain, the Marshall Plan was also designed to contain the spread of communism and solidify American influence within the Western Bloc. The result was paradoxical. Europe rose again, but at the same time, it became increasingly dependent on the United States. However, America did not stand without a rival. On the other side of the world, the Soviet Union emerged as a counterpower. The two became locked in the Cold War, not through direct open combat, but through a struggle for global influence, coups, proxy wars, technological races, and even the race for outer space. The Cold War came to an end on December 5, 1991, when the Soviet Union officially dissolved.
Just before the Kremlin cameras clicked on today, Mikhail Gorbachev said to himself, quote, "When you have to go, you have to go." He then officially resigned as president of the Soviet Union and turned over the nuclear codes to the new top man, Russia's Boris Yeltsin. You are looking at a live shot of the Russian flag flying tonight over the Kremlin. Tom Fenton begins our coverage of this historic day.
Tonight, the red flag was taken down from the Kremlin, where it has flown since the 1917 revolution. The Soviet Union it symbolized is now dead. In its place, they raised the flag of Boris Yeltsin's Russia. Mikhail Gorbachev, the eighth and last ruler of the communist empire founded by Lenin, announced he was quitting. He appeared sad and broken, but hoped history would give him credit.
Society has been granted its freedom.
That event became a historic milestone. For the first time, the United States stood alone as the sole superpower in the history of the modern world. So far, the United States has built something far greater than just an empire. They have built a global ecosystem that is nearly impossible to match. Its power lies not only in its nuclear warheads or its carrier strike groups, but in the system they planted from the very beginning, roots that strike deep into the heart of the modern world order. Look around us. The United Nations, the UN Security Council, and the financial institutions that dictate the planet's economy, such as the World Bank and the IMF, these are all architectures of American design. It is a grand blueprint to place Washington not just as a leader, but as the world's center of gravity. On the defense side, this dominance is locked in by NATO, a massive military alliance stretching from North America across Europe to the gates of Turkey. NATO is not merely a defense treaty. It is the primary pillar ensuring that any global military challenge must face a collective war machine led by America. However, no system is immune to change. Cracks began to appear as American domestic politics shifted. Under the America First policy, Washington started to seem hesitant about its own role. This tendency to turn inward has created a power vacuum, an empty space that is being rapidly filled by China's ambition and a resurgent Russia. Despite this balance beginning to waver, many political analysts remain at one cold conclusion. The United States will not fall overnight. They are predicted to remain the dominant superpower for decades to come. This view is notably shared by Michael Beckley, a political scientist and author of the book, Unrivaled, Why America Will Remain the World's Sole Superpower. Beckley argues that, even though institutionally the United States appears chaotic, with deep political polarization and various internal issues, its rivals actually possess structural weaknesses that are far more serious. Take China, for example. It is the only nation that comes close to America's power when measured by total national capacity. However, in economic terms, America's net wealth is still significantly greater, and its military strength is several times more powerful than China's. This gap, according to Beckley, is impossible to close in the foreseeable future. Even if America's internal conditions worsen, its long-term economic growth prospects are still considered stronger compared to any other nation. That is why, in the view of many analysts, the United States, with all its contradictions and flaws, remains the nation most likely to endure at the pinnacle of global power. But what about Russia? The nation often cited as America's rival in terms of military technology, weaponry, and hard power. According to Michael Beckley, Even though Russia is the primary successor to the Soviet Union, which was once America's greatest rival, Russia today is still unable to challenge American power comprehensively. The reasons are structural. Russia's military budget is still roughly 10 times smaller than that of the United States. Its economy lags far behind. It is often noted that Russia's entire economy is smaller than that of the state of Texas. Furthermore, Russia lacks a strong network of allies to sustain it in a global-scale conflict. This stands in stark contrast to America, which is backed by NATO, the most solid military alliance in modern history. Some speculate that Russia and China might unite to challenge American dominance. But in practice, this alliance is considered highly fragile. The two nations still have disputes. Along a border thousands of kilometers long, they compete for influence in the Eurasian region, and they even sell weapons to each other's enemies. Nonetheless, Beckley warns that the China-Russia alliance, even if it is not solid, still needs to be monitored closely. It is not because of their current strength, but because of their shared objective to challenge American dominance and to attempt to take its place as the world's superpower. The United States enjoys privileges that no other nation possesses. They are not only able to dictate the direction of global trends, but they can also wage war in any corner of the globe without ever having to worry about the security of their own territory. Its citizens can sleep soundly without the shadow of war at their own doorstep. America also possesses a luxury rarely granted to any other power: the freedom to make mistakes. They can engage in the most controversial wars. They can even trigger global economic crises. And yet they remain standing firm as the strongest nation on earth. In its foreign policy, America is not fully bound by the interests of other nations. They can choose which conflicts to face and which ones to ignore. While many nations are forced to focus on handling conflicts and issues within their own borders, the United States is different. Because its homeland is relatively secure, America has the luxury to choose when and where it wishes to intervene in the world. Many nations eventually adopt American laws, its rules, and even its standards. As the world's economic center, America attracts global investment, invites the world's brightest talents, and lives within an accumulation of wealth that continues to grow. But behind that glory, there is always the shadow of power. America's foreign policy has frequently triggered conflicts and instability in various parts of the world. The impact of these actions is often barely felt within America's own borders, or sometimes not felt at all. But for smaller nations, the consequences are all too real. The decisions are made by the superpower, yet the consequences are lived by others. Throughout different eras, the same pattern repeats. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Ukraine serve as examples of how global conflicts transform into local crises. Strategic decisions are made far away from the battlefield. The consequences arise in small towns, in civilian infrastructure, and in the daily lives of the people who call those places home.